writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. We're your hosts. I'm Joni.
And I'm Stephanie. So this week on the podcast, we are talking to Tara Elroy. So she used to write for magazines, but she found writing steamy romance novels with quirky characters way more fun. So before she took on her alter ego persona of Tara, she wrote historical novel and a nonfiction book about climate change using her real name. And then her debut novel, For the Birds, is the first of many climate-smart romances that she plans to publish under her pen name, Tara Elroy.
So by climate smart romance, she's using the media of romance writing, I suppose, to also convey a message about the environment and about climate change, and a little bit of a call to action to readers who might be interested in learning a little bit more and helping. So I really liked it. We kind of talked about it being a bit of a Trojan horse, including a message that's really valuable and important in a fun and engaging story. So it was a great interview. Tara was super chatty. She had lots to say. So I hope you enjoyed as much as we did.
Thank you, Tara, for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get into it, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing journey, and then why you ultimately decided to do self-publishing?
Sure. So I've been telling stories since I was about 6 years old. My earliest memory as a storyteller, anyway, was sitting on the living room floor with a tape recorder and a piece of paper. And it was a story about a storm, and I was rattling, I'm not going to do it now, I was tempted, but I'm not going to do it. I was rattling the piece of paper to make the thunder sound and talking about the lightning. And it's just kind of ironic that now I'm writing similar stories where, as I focus on what I call climate smart romance, and specifically the books I'm working on now are part of a trilogy called the Love and Disaster series. But in between age 6 and now, I studied film and screenwriting at Yale, and I spent 10 years writing screenplays, selling none of them. But I did have them read everywhere at all the major studios, and I was a script reader for a creative artists agency for a period of time. And then I went on to teach English and just, kept writing and started doing freelance writing for magazines. So I spent 10 years as a journalist writing mostly for trade publications, especially agriculture, which is ironic because I do not farm. And in fact, I struggle to keep most plants alive, but I do have 4 living plants in my apartment right now. Yeah, so I told you I babble.
That's perfect. We love babbling.
Oh, good. So I wrote for magazines for a long time, and in the process, started learning about environmental issues that were new to me. I considered myself an environmentalist. I was buying organic food. I was recycling. But I didn't know about things like electronic waste and the impact of our laptops and phones and stereos once they're discarded on, the toxic chemicals that they leach into rivers in China and Africa, and the health hazards that are caused by that. So that was, one article where I learned a whole bunch. I ended up learning about composting, and I just kind of became almost obsessed with creative waste diversion. I had a blog about that for a while. And then I was writing for 5 years. I wrote a monthly column about seed science and for an agricultural magazine. And in that process, I spoke with researchers all over the world. And in the last year or two, I was getting the repeated message that we're trying to figure out what to do for farmers when their fields flood. We're trying to help farmers cope with drought. We're trying to help. And so initially, I wasn't catching it because they were just saying the one specific thing, drought or flood. But then I started speaking with more people who were like, this is climate change. This is what's happening because of climate change. And we are, we're really Some of the people that I spoke with were really scared, and others were more hopeful, and some were, people's reactions really ran the gamut. But that then inspired me to pitch a column idea to my editor focusing on climate change and farming, just to help farmers prepare for climate change. The editor loved the idea. We ran with it. We did that for 2 years until the publisher folded the magazine and its sister publication, which I also wrote for. So, but in that last year, then also, we had an unfortunate administration change in the United States, and he who shall not be named was essentially made it impossible for USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture researchers to talk about climate change. So people I had had access to for interviews for 10 years, I suddenly couldn't get a hold of. And finally, their press officer called me one day and said, I just have to explain because I know you've been getting the runaround. But the administration has banned all of USDA scientists from talking about climate change, and they're taking names. And these, the researchers are pissed, but they also don't want to lose their jobs. So she said, if you want to talk about the latest variety of flower, of tulip or whatever, then they can talk to you about that, but they can't talk to you about climate change. So that was kind of shocking, and that happened at the beginning of 2017. In October, with no notice, the editor of the magazine was informed that the publisher was folding the magazine, and he had to leave his office. He emailed me, couldn't email me from the company email. He contacted me through Facebook Messenger and was like, we just lost our jobs. So then we stayed up messaging each other for hours late at night. Like, what are you going to do? I don't know. What are you going to do? Or, it was just very crazy. But at this point, I was in the process of writing my first novel under my real name. And I was still in that place of like looking for an agent and a publisher. I had been invited to a month-long residency at Vermont Studio Center, and it was my first residency invitation. So I was very excited about that. I went to that residency in February of 2018, and still thinking like traditional publishing route. And then I came back from that and went on a trip with my partner, and he said, if you wanted to do something other than traditional, I would help you. And he was like, I don't know what it costs to publish your own books, but, I'll pay for that or whatever. So I was like, oh, thanks, but I still really had my mind set on traditional publishing. And then it was just like a writer friend of mine, who I've known for years, told me that, he had just talked to a friend about a friend's mom who was an indie author, and how she was really like doing great and selling her books and blah, blah, blah. And so that changed my mind, and I just started exploring more. And like in my mind, there was this stigma about publishing your own work. But the more I explored it, the more I realized like, no, I could do this. I could do this really well. I have a background in graphic design and all the things that like you need to do or hire someone to do if you're publishing your own work. So I decided to take the leap and do that with The Orderly, which is the first novel. Okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to reveal my real name. So The Orderly is the first novel published by me, Rebecca L. Fraser. And I published that in September of 2018. Well, as I was kind of like beginning the process of publishing that, all of the archives on Growing Magazine's website, which was the agricultural publication, were gone. Like the publisher sold or I don't think they sold, I don't know what happened, but anyway, they let go of the domain name, and it was bought by some skeezy little someone. I don't know who they are. They have stolen articles from multiple authors. They don't credit us. They haven't taken everything, but they've taken some. Anyway, but what is missing are like the archives. There's a couple pieces, but it used to be like these beautiful PDF magazines that you could just read online. They're all gone. And I thought, oh my God, the farmers will not have this information about how to thrive during the changing climate. Like, this was really important information for them, and they're not going to have it. So since I was already on this self-publishing track, I thought, well, what the heck, I'll just compile all the articles into a book. And that became A Farmer's Guide to Climate Disruption. So I published The Orderly in September of 2018, The Farmer's Guide in December of 2018, and then just this summer I recorded the audiobook, and which the company that I worked for, Pro Audio Voices, worked with, they liked the concept enough and felt that the work was valuable to bring this information to farmers. So they said, well, we'd like to produce the podcast at no extra cost. We'll donate this to you and to the cause. So now, just 2 weeks ago, I guess, the podcast launched. The audiobook is out there, and so somewhere along the way, like in writing The Orderly, I've always been like this hopeless romantic, and I love chick flicks and all the Nora Ephron movies, if you're familiar with those. And
love her.
Right. And then The Orderly was just the most, like, it was actually inspired by real people who were in my family. And it was just like the quirkiest, but also kind of in some ways, most beautiful love story that I had heard was, between my uncle and the woman who he married. And they've passed, in the late 90s, but the late 1990s. But their story stuck with me, and I really felt that I had to write it as a novel. And in the process of writing it, I just, first of all, fell in love with writing novels versus writing screenplays. So much more freedom to really express through language. So that was one thing, but also, I don't know, that book isn't like a strict romance because the male protagonist marries someone else in the middle. Like, after he meets the female protagonist, he marries someone else. So I didn't call it a romance, but I just called it a dark love story. But I don't know, I had been watching all these chick flicks, but I hadn't really been reading romance. And then writing this, I don't know, it just transformed me. And I started to really think about, like, well, what do I want to do? Every year or so, I kind of assess where I am in my life and in my career and what I want to put out into the world. And I never wanted to be a journalist. That was something that I kind of fell into, and it worked really well because I was a single mom. So I got to be home with my daughter and earn a living putting words on a page. But I really all along wanted to be doing the creative writing, but I had learned so much as a journalist and become ever more passionate about environmental issues and about helping people see their own agency in turning the tide of climate change around so that we have hope for a future on this planet. And I thought about, like, well, who's really reading my articles, and does it really make a difference? Like, I always tried to write things from a perspective of, like, yeah, there is some bad news here, but here's what you can do. But still, the magazine had a reach of 30,000 people. They were all farmers. How many of them really happened to catch those particular columns, and how many actually took the information to heart? I don't know. But I thought, I love love stories. I love writing novels. And I know from the work that I've done in not only as a journalist, but like freelance corporate writer and marketing, that people learn more and take in more, pay attention more to stories than they do to fiction, than they do actually to the thing, these big scary news articles. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions to that, but on the whole, people take in more through story where they can relate. And I think the biggest issue with a lot of the environmental community, I mean, climate change, we have known about climate change since 1988 was when the first NASA scientist testified to Congress that we needed to do something about this. And in the US, there's still debate, and that's crazy. But that's been able to happen because it's such a scary issue. And when I was first conceiving of the monthly column for the Ag magazine, I had no clue what I was getting into. And once I tried, and this was just with a focus toward agriculture, once I tried to actually break it down, I realized, like, oh my God, this is so dense and so scary and so confusing. And I'm not a scientist, you know, I'm like a translator is how I view myself. But like, how many people read the latest news or see what's on the television and just feel like, oh well, it's nothing I can do, and then kind of pretend it's not happening or forget, you know, or whatever. So I just thought, well, I can combine these two areas that I'm really passionate about, and I can try and make a difference in this way. You know, as you guys know, romance is one of the top selling genres in the US, at least. I'm not sure about the world. Do you know?
I want to say the world, but yeah. At least for Kobo.
Yeah. Okay, good. So, you know, if people can take in a story and learn something about some aspect of environmental science that makes it real to them and shines a light, you know, of hope on like, oh, I could do that. You know, I could be more careful about that. I could teach my children this. Then you know, I will have succeeded.
It's like a Trojan horse. You're getting the
yeah,
message.
exactly. Yeah. Do you know Marie Forleo?
Sorry, I don't.
So there's this woman, Marie Forleo. She's like a motivational speaker, and she has all these online kind of business courses, which I have not taken, but I have watched a few of her videos, and one really stuck with me, or one phrase really stuck with me. Sell them what they want, give them what they need. So her first book, which was apparently a bestseller, was titled something like How to Get the Guy, or How to Get Over Your Breakup, or something.
I Googled it. Make every man want you.
Yeah, there it is. Oh my God. What doesn't, you know, I mean, if men are what you're into, why wouldn't you want that? But apparently, in her, and I haven't read the book, but the way she described it is it's really about self-love. But if she had called it, you know, how to love yourself, how many copies would she have sold?
That's true.
Yeah, so I took that idea to heart, and that's what I'm trying to run with now with these Tara Elroy climate smart romances.
Very cool. I'm interested because I think you're the first author that we've talked to that's doing this, but it's something that I think there's a real opportunity for with indie publishing. Like with your book about the Farmer's Guide to Climate Disruption, was it? Mm-hmm. So did you publish that one independently?
I did, yeah. Part of the reason I did that is because, you know, traditional publishing takes so long.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask, yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, so with that book, I felt this incredible sense of urgency. Unfortunately, the result is that book has so many typos. It is not even funny. But I did, when I was recording the audiobook, I went through the ebook and corrected them. So the ebook is now hopefully all correct. The print book remains a mess, but hopefully people will buy the ebook and listen to the audiobook and buy fewer print books.
I mean, that's a great thing, though. You can edit your ebook at any time when you're indie published. Like, you don't have to go through a publisher.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. So, and I'm sorry, Joni, because you had more of a question than I.
No, that was kind of it. I wanted to ask you how long it took you, because I think that this is, like, I think the climate change topic is so time sensitive and it's so important right now. And I feel like there's a real gap for indie publishing there, for people to say like, yes, these books may take time and we need to do a certain amount of research and make them as high quality as we can, but they don't necessarily need to go through the machine that is trad publishing, because it does take a long time and not all of that time is the research part. So yeah, I think it's cool that you're doing this, and I think it's something that I hope that we see more of, because I think it's really interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it is, it's so, let's see, I started working on that, I want to say in June, and the book was out in December, so 6 months. However, as mentioned, like I had spent years researching, and the articles were already written.
I think it's really important to point that out, that it wasn't thrown together last minute. It was that you already had it, but you were able to get it from conception to market really quickly.
Yeah, and I had, so there was the very last chapter was a transcribed interview with a farmer who I had interviewed in September of 2017, and that was going to be the January 2018 column, but then of course the magazine was gone at that point. So that was like some previously unpublished material. And then I also reached out to someone I had interviewed a couple of years earlier and asked if he would write the foreword, and so he did. So that was like, and then I wrote like little, I repackaged all of the information. So it was like, a section on soil, a section on water, a section on crops, etc. And so I wrote a little introduction for each section, but I mean, that was nothing, like, a few hundred words. So yeah. And the other advice that I would offer for anyone trying to like rush something to publication is be really careful when you hire an editor. I hired an editor. He was my former editor at the magazine. He's great. I fully trust him. I do not know what happened. One of two things happened in terms of like why there are so many typos in that print book. It's either that he thought I was hiring for developmental and line editing and not copy editing, and so that was what I got, and I was in such a hurry that I didn't go through with a fine-tooth comb, because I was like, oh hey, he edited it. So that is one possibility of what happened, was that we didn't communicate clearly. So that's the word to the wise, is make sure when you hire an editor, you are clear with them about what you're hiring them for. And if you're not hiring them for copy editing, then make sure that you do it yourself really carefully. But the other thing, the other possibility is that I just simply uploaded the wrong file, or like formatted, laid out and uploaded the incorrect file. So I'm not sure what happened there, but I don't.
It actually happens a lot when scanning PDF to ebook, though. I don't know, Steph, maybe you know more about that, but I know when I was interning at a publishing house, like often scanned PDFs will pull, like if there's a C and an I next to each other, sometimes it will make them an A. Like things like that do happen, because it's not an exact science, scanning PDFs. So it's that as well.
Hey,
to be part of it.
Yeah, I'm really glad to know that. It will help me be more careful.
So I'm curious about the difference that you found writing nonfiction and then writing a romance novel. Like, was there a big difference?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, huge difference. I mean, first of all, romance is way more fun.
Yeah. I was going to say, maybe a little more dramatic.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, you get to have characters, and you can take poetic license. I mean, my books are heavily researched, and I do, speak with people, interview people for my fiction books. But, I don't, kind of panic if I get a fact slightly wrong. I mean, I'm making every effort to make sure it is scientifically accurate, but I'm not a scientist, and this is not nonfiction. So, the main point is humanize environmental science, humanize environmentalists and scientists in general, make the whole thing be friendly, not scary, and get people to explore on their own. I have to say, after I released, it was still in the pre-order stages. When For the Birds was in pre-order stages, I sent out the first chapter to my mailing list, and a librarian from Wisconsin, I think is where he's from, wrote back to me to say, I did not know about this relationship between horseshoe crabs and red knot birds, and that's so fascinating, and I've never seen a horseshoe crab, but I've always thought they're really interesting, and because of this I went and I read that, and and I'm buying your book. So it was just like, yay, a triple win. He he was inspired to research more and think about the issue, and he's buying the book, and he actually wrote to me to say all that, so that was cool. But yeah, it's just way more fun to write fiction. I think.
I'm on the same kind of vein. I'm curious about, so you trained in screenplay writing, which is really more different than I would have thought to writing narrative fiction. And is there anything that you learned from the writing courses, I guess, that you took then about screenplay writing that carries over into novel writing?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I feel like writing, clearly there are different forms and there are different rules for each type of writing, but my screenwriting training and practice has made me a stronger novelist. When I was exclusively writing screenplays, in the periods where I was between drafts or whatever, I would write poetry. Admittedly, bad poetry. But I always felt that writing poetry helped me remember how to be succinct. And that's really important in screenwriting. And that training in not only being succinct, but how to get into a scene and how to get out of a scene, where to get in, where to get out, what details are really important. That training carries into my fiction writing, into my novels. And I've seen a lot of fiction writers, not published fiction writers, but in my writing group or in clients that I've worked with, or folks who would submit things. I used to run a literary event here in Connecticut, and people who would submit their stories, I would see so often that people they think, oh, well, I have to include the visual details. So they'll describe the entire room, and it's no, describe what your character would pay attention to. It's the rare person, if anyone, who walks into a room and is like, oh, 7 paintings on the walls, varying colors, lots of iridescence. There's an easel and a chair and a pair of shoes over there. And that light has this kind of, nobody does that. You kind of get a quick snapshot based on what your thing is, but that's something that my screenwriting training helped teach me, because when you're writing a screenplay, you are trying to efficiently and very subtly direct the camera, but you can't tell the director pan left or whatever. So you have to describe what the character sees in a sentence or what they're reacting to, and it may be that in the, just the whole structure is, there's a slug line, interior, Rebecca's apartment, living room, day, that's the slug line. And then there's the brief description. Rebecca sits at a table looking at her, this is a terrible description, but Rebecca sits at her table looking into her computer screen as she continues the interview with Stephanie and Joni from Kobo, and then there's the dialogue, whatever Rebecca's saying, whatever Stephanie says next, whatever. But it's it's very specific, and you don't have a lot of time to say anything.
That would drive me nuts if I was trying to write.
I got really into it and I loved it because I am a very visual thinker, but it's totally different from novel writing, being able to really get into how a character feels and what they think and what they smell and hear, and not having to put all that in dialogue is great.
So you mentioned that you're a writing coach.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any top tips for writers, just off the top of your head? Might be a hard question.
Sure. I think, one is, kind of harkens back to what I was just saying. Don't put in every detail. choose the details that your character would notice. As an example, in the book that I am intending to publish in February, Wesley, who is the male protagonist, is an epidemiologist. So he's viewing everything through the lens of how does it affect human health. When he goes to visit Sage's art studio for the first time, he notices the smell of solvents and thinks, if we end up together, I'm going to have to get her an air filter. Because that's who he is, you know? But Sage walks into his office for the first time and notices the colors and the posters. She's an artist, you know? So she's walking down the street and she's, you know, the texture of the rain on the slate sidewalks, you know, and blah, 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 blah. So one, the details that your character would notice, not every detail. Two, you can develop an ear for dialogue by eavesdropping on people or by listening actively in the conversations that you're having, which is a skill. Just really like, and this is a life skill as well, you know, in conversation, don't be thinking of the next thing you're going to say or the next question you're going to ask. It's more difficult if you're conducting an interview, but in everyday conversation, you know, actually listen to the person and not just their words. Listen to their inflection and observe their patterns. You know, what does their body language tell you as they are saying whatever it is they're saying? You know, do you sense their excitement or their sadness? What is it about the tone in their voice that tells you that? What is it about their body movements or the way they're holding themselves? You know, often people who are not feeling great emotionally will kind of round their shoulders and hunch over. You know, someone who's more confident tends to sit with their shoulders back. I think studying psychology it doesn't mean you have to take a class, but just, you know, picking up a book on, you know, any sort of human behavior, whether it's about relationships or pathology, whatever it is. I mean, I think that can really help writers to hone their skills.
Do you like to read the type of books that you write, or do you like to keep them separate? Are you a big romance reader?
I am becoming more of a romance reader. For a long time, I was afraid to read the types of things that I was writing. And then someone who I met at a conference, she was, you know, giving a speech, actually said, you need to read in your own genre. And don't worry about copying other people. But that was my fear. Like, oh, I'm going to end up writing in someone else's voice. So I took her advice and it's been great. Like it makes reading feel even less like work and more like just complete joy, except that, you know, I do have this trained mind that also happens to pay attention to the construction of a sentence and the, you know, construction of a scene and whatever else. But still, it's like, you know, yeah. So I am now reading more romance than I have in the past, and it's delightful.
I'm going to ask for your recommendations later on. So for anyone listening and they don't know about your novel, can you tell us about For the Birds and what it's about?
Sure. So For the Birds is set in a fictional small town on the coast of Delaware where, and this is the real science behind the book, where it's the only place in the world where, or one of the few places in the world, because there are different species of red knot, but this particular rufa species, red knots migrate from the southern tip of Argentina all the way to the Arctic. And they stop on the Delaware Bay to refuel. And what they eat is the non-viable eggs of the horseshoe crab. So it's not even predatory. They're not eating live eggs that could hatch. They eat the ones that are not viable. And so it's, in a sense, a symbiotic relationship between these two species. And so the story is not about them. It's actually about the wildlife biologists who are passionate about them. Claire is a single mom with a 5-year-old boy. She's just graduating with her second bachelor's degree because she's finally decided to follow her passion and try and give herself a career in wildlife biology. Brian is new to town, and he has been hired by the Delaware Fish and Wildlife Service to run a variety of programs in the state. But one of the programs that he's in charge of is observing these species and cataloging the data so that they can then take that to the state and try and get greater protections for these two species of wildlife. Because horseshoe crabs have been harvested for medical research and also as bait, and so they're endangered. And red knots are also, I think they're on the threatened list. I may have said that backwards. One of them is threatened, one of them is endangered. In any case, so Brian's job is to help protect these species. That's basically what Claire wants to be doing. They meet, and she does not trust him at all. She doesn't trust any man. She's an abuse survivor. So so they meet, and it's kind of almost an enemies to lovers story, definitely a soulmate story. And in some senses ends up, there are elements of the stuck together story, but not really. It's more his choice to help her in a time of crisis.
Awesome. So we're going into NaNoWriMo. I know this is probably going to be released after. But we've kind of been chatting in the office about how we're approaching writing and that kind of thing. And with romance, as a newer romance writer, I'm curious to know, did you go into this thinking, okay, there's a structure that romance has, and there's certain tropes, and the idea is that you're writing an original story that sort of fits into the genre, right? How much was that a conscious decision for you while you were writing? Are you a big plotter, or did you just sort of go with the flow and see how it went?
So my process for writing For the Birds is very different from the process of the book that I'm working on now, the first book in the Love and Disaster trilogy. For the Birds was actually written as a screenplay in 2008. And it was inspired by a conversation that I had with a friend who is a restoration ecologist who just, we were talking about the variety of things that he does at Massachusetts Fish and Wildlife Service. And he was like, oh yeah, did you know about this, blah, 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 down in Delaware? And so then I thought that was fascinating and started researching. Wrote several drafts of that screenplay, submitted it to a bunch of places, did not sell. It was, got some notice in some competitions. Set that down, and then kind of forgot about it until I started, when I was at the residency in Vermont, I finished The Orderly and then started working on this first book in the Love and Disaster trilogy. And then I got honestly I just got stuck on that. And I thought, why don't I just pick up For the Birds again and I'll just quickly turn that into a novel. And I'll have that out so fast, and then I'll return to this, because this one's taking a lot longer. Well, it did not go so fast, because I saw all the flaws in the script. I, by this point, was a much stronger writer, and also discovered that some of the science had changed. It was 10 years later. And so the situation with horseshoe crabs was different. Some laws had been put in place, some laws had not. There were a variety of changes that I needed to reassess, re-research, and figure out how things were going to fit into the script. Into the book. So that one, I think I did. Part of the issue with my screenplays was that I was not focusing a lot on character. I was focusing heavily on plot, which really was a disservice to my scripts. So with the book now, it's like, okay, I need to go back and do more character work. So yeah, so that I can't say plotter or pantser. I think in general, I have become more of a plotter. And with the first Love and Disaster book, and I'm not giving you the title because I don't know it. I keep, I have so many titles in mind for this. But with the first Love and Disaster book, I spent probably 6 months, maybe a year, just redrafting the plot. And then part of that, scenes would kind of emerge, and so I'd write them down. But, it was like, okay, here's the plot again. Wait, now what about the character? So I was really like, I'm really shifting my whole process of like, I want to get the characters first, but I want to have the concept clear. So it's an evolving, it's really evolving. I'm just trying to like become more efficient. And I think spending so much time revising the outline, I mean, I wrote, I don't know, 8 drafts of the outline before I really got into writing scenes, although I was, as I said, like if the scene comes, I'm not going to not write it, I will write it down. But, and then once I start like heavily going into writing the scenes, then of course things change. Like, oh, well, that doesn't make sense, or I see like, in this book that I'm working on now, there's a tornado. And initially, like, I have all these places are destroyed, but miraculously, the gallery where all of Sage's work is on display is just fine. Well, that's not realistic, So
It'd be a romance reason.
yeah, exactly. So I'll go back and be like, okay, like, let's not be too easy on the characters. How can this play into the romance? So it's definitely an evolving process. What about you? Are you plotting or pantsing?
Well, so this is something that we try and do NaNoWriMo in the office every year, and every year I fail, and I think it's because I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to plotting. And the more authors that we talk to on this podcast, the more I'm like, yeah, the ones that are doing well and have finished books have planned that out a little bit more than just going into it, because it can be really fun to just kind of free write, but for me, I fall apart, so. Yeah. These are things that I'm learning from authors. How have you found it writing during a pandemic? Have you had your creativity impacted in any way, positive or negative?
It's been actually quite good. I initially treated it as like a residency. So I did a ton of yoga. I was doing like 3 hours of yoga a day in the morning and evening, and then writing and painting in between. So yeah, it's actually been okay. At this point, it still is. Like I worked through a lot of the holes in the first draft of the book. So I made like 9 drafts of the outline, but then with a book draft, I consider like it's only a draft if I've changed it structurally. And if any revisions that I make along the way are revisions to that draft. So I did draft 1, took months and months, and then sent that out to betas, got their notes, by the end of August, and then banged out draft 2 in a month. And with like pretty significant structural changes. And now that's with betas again. So I'm waiting for feedback on that. But yeah, I've found in general, like it's been pretty good. It is still stressful, and I am starting to, miss really seeing people in the way that I used to be able to see people. But if anything, it's been kind of a refuge for me. The writing has been a refuge in the midst of all this stress.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have felt like that, which is good. It's nice to be able to do something that fosters creativity a little bit. There was a bit I was saying to Steph in For the Birds when, like, we can cut this out if it's too spoilery, but there is a subplot about an infectious disease where everybody's like masked and wearing hazmats. And I was like, oh, I wonder when she wrote this, because it does feel very strange right now to be looking at that and going, oh yeah, remember when we didn't live in a world like this?
Oh my God, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, it definitely resonates now.
When you mentioned the fever number, I'm like, oh my God, that's really high. And like, I would only know that from this.
All
Right.
these
I
things
forgot
we've
about.
learned.
Yeah. I don't think that's a spoiler. You can,
I don't think so. Yeah, it's interesting reading stuff like that now.
yeah. And what's been interesting too is so the pandemic is also related to climate change. And so I've been considering, I actually started outlining the next book in the Love and Disaster trilogy to occur during the pandemic. And boy, is it like a great idea. And I don't know if I can write it. I don't know if I can deal with any more pandemic. Like when I first came up with that concept, it was like maybe April. And in my mind, we were going to be done with this by June.
Why did
Now,
we all think that? I thought that too, and I don't, now that I think about it, I don't understand why. I guess because swine flu was like that.
yeah.
And we had some precedent. But yeah, I can understand why it might feel too soon for a while.
Yeah, so now book two is not going to be that. It'll be something else, but
For any listeners or readers of your books who are interested in climate change and maybe need some hope or need to know like what we can do, because it's so much bigger than any of us, really. Like the scale is so much bigger than we can handle. But is there anything that you know that people can do on an individual level
oh, there are
that
so
makes a
many things
difference?
that
I mean,
people do. And unfortunately, by the time this airs, it will be too late to say this, but voting actually especially, if you're in the United States and we have, this terrifying election coming up, it's super important but elsewhere in the world, people also have elections, and it's really important to vote for candidates who recognize the critical point that we are at right now, as a species, and who are willing to take bold steps. In the US, we're calling this the Green New Deal. I think that's actually a term that's been used globally, but more creating more infrastructure for sustainable living, etc. So vote for candidates who have an eye on climate change mitigation. Mitigation meaning, reducing climate change, turning the tide, stemming the tide of climate change. Some scientists say it's too late to reverse it, but we can at least slow it. And others are more hopeful that we could potentially reverse it. Not to get back to where we used to be, but actually maybe reverse is too strong a word, but stop it. There are scientists who do feel that we can stop it still if we get moving. So that's one thing. Vote wherever you are for the climate aware candidate. Also, two of the biggest contributors to climate change are air travel and agriculture. So flying is great, traveling is great. I love traveling. I will not give up traveling, especially not with my daughter 3,000 miles away. But we don't need to do it as often. We can be more careful about how we do it. If you are traveling, try and stay in a hotel or an Airbnb where they are using green operations. Whether if you can find a hotel that's been built sustainably, LEED certification is a big thing. Green Building Council. Those are some things to look for. Walk wherever you can. Don't take an Uber. Don't take a cab. Don't get on the train if you don't have to. Walk. Don't drive your car. Ride your bicycle. If you must, if the distance is too far, try to take a bus if that works. Unfortunately, my city has a bus system, but the buses are really unreliable. So that's difficult. But if I'm going into New York, I take the train instead of driving, those types of things. Use a reusable water bottle, preferably made from glass or metal rather than plastic. If you're looking at a household item and there's a plastic option or another type of option, metal, glass, wood, go for the other option. Plastic is a nightmare. It's an environmental nightmare. It's a health hazard for the people who manufacture it. If you're considering siding your house, do not, under any circumstances, consider, I'm calling it plastic siding. That is not the correct term for it, and I've just lost the actual term for it. But choose a natural material to side your house, because petroleum-based materials are a nightmare. Getting back to agriculture, supporting organic agriculture is important. Supporting local agriculture when possible is very beneficial. But my personal choice is organic. My top choice is organic and local. I have a farm share, and I walk to my farmer's market once a week and get my locally grown organic produce. Whatever is not available at the farmer's market, if I need it, then I buy organic. Because the chemicals that are put into the ground in conventional agriculture are so detrimental to the soil, to the plant. The nutritional value is not as high. There are numerous reasons to buy organic produce or food in general, especially dairy, meat, if you're doing that. Of course, a plant-based diet is also very helpful in terms of mitigating climate change for a variety of reasons that I will not go into right now, because I really could go on forever and ever. But and being vocal about things. I paint, and I've been painting with acrylics because the toxic solvents used to clean up oil were not something that I wanted to bring into my household, and they're not good for the environment either. But it was also bothering me to be painting with acrylic. So I wrote to Golden Paints and asked them, shared my concerns, asked if they had considered a bio-based acrylic medium for their pigments. And they wrote back and thanked me. They're very gracious about it, and thanked me and explained why they don't. Actually, they have explored it because they too are concerned, but why they're sticking at the moment with petroleum-based. And then they also said, if you would like to switch to oil, we could recommend this, and there are ways to clean your brushes without using the solvents, where you can just use, linseed oil, which is a plant-based oil. So there are all sorts of things you can do. I've actually, as Rebecca, published a free ebook called How to Be Climate Smart, 30 Easy Tips. And I don't know if you publish your show notes. I haven't.
Yes, we do, and we will include links.
Okay, yeah. So you can see the link to that in the show notes. But there are all sorts of things that people can do. Getting rid of lawn is a big one if you have that choice. Composting, I live in an apartment. I don't have the option to grow anything here, which makes compost not useful for me. So I save my food scraps in a paper bag in my freezer, and when the paper bag is full, I walk it down to my neighbor's yard and throw it in their compost pile. And they're happy about that. They really appreciate that. So it's a win for all of us.
I guess this is kind of in the same vein now that I think about it, but we noticed that you had a Patreon, and supporting artists and the climate is kind of the same in my mind, supporting what you believe in. Do you have any tips for authors interested in starting a Patreon? Because it's something people have shown interest in, but they don't know how to start it, or they don't know if they should start it. So what's your opinion on the best ways of starting it and letting your readers know that you've started one?
Well, yeah, definitely. If you already have readers, then you're at an advantage starting it. And I definitely recommend it. You might be surprised at the people who come out of the woodwork to support you, people who you know and people who you really don't know that well. I've developed friendships with people who live in my neighborhood and chose to support me, but who I really didn't know that well before. And then some of my supporters are people who know and love me. But I would just say that, you want, if you're going to have a Patreon, you need to be prepared to be transparent. So sometimes, I don't know if this is common among authors. I am very shy, but I also am very driven. So I've learned to share things that I don't always, maybe wouldn't have felt comfortable sharing in the past. And so I try to honor my own personal boundaries, but also, be open. If people are going to give you money and not necessarily get anything in return other than that warm feeling, the great thing about Patreon is you can give people something in return. And initially I was doing that. And then I realized my patrons didn't actually care about the little rewards. So I, at some point, said, I'm finding this just like an added stress in my life, and I'm doing so many things right now. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you don't really care about the rewards, and you would be just as happy with just knowing that you're supporting an artist. And they were all like, yeah, you're right. So I took away all my rewards. I have all these different tiers where people can support. And, I gave them all fun names, but I don't actually offer anything in return other than the occasional update. And I recently decided that I was going to be very transparent about what I'm doing with the money. So I sent an accounting last month, and with a promise that I will do this whenever I have something to report. So last month I sent an accounting. This is how I've spent your money since, the beginning of the year or whatever. I forget what the time period was that I chose, but I gave them the real costs of producing the audiobook and the podcast, and talked about that was offset slightly by a patron who offered to kick in $500 toward the production of the audiobook, just, of their own volition, and by a sponsor that I garnered for the podcast. And then I, included what I spent on paint, and because I'm also, so my patrons are supporting me as an author, as a painter, and as a trash fashion artist. So I just shared the real costs of all those different things. This is what I spent on paint. This is what I spent on canvas. This is what I spent producing the audiobook. This was the amount of money that I had to work with because I had been saving it up for a little while. Here, costs that I anticipate coming up are editing the new book, So I'd just say, be transparent, be ready to be transparent, and then put a call to action at the back of every book and on your website, just inviting people to support your work, and put your link. Yeah.
It's good advice. I've never heard it that way of being transparent, but it makes total sense to me to lay it all out like that, because people don't really know how much it costs to be an author, and specifically a self-published author.
Well, yeah, that's what, and so one of the costs too was I think I must have gone back to the beginning of the year, because I also talked about it was X number of dollars to buy new ISBNs, and it was X number of dollars to do, whatever, to pay Ingram Spark for the print thing. And yeah, they don't have a sense of what it costs. There are some, and this is just a personal choice, there are some Patreon creators who kind of talk about, you're going to help me pay my electric bill, or you're going to help me quit my day job, or you're going to, whatever. That is a line that I personally don't want to get into. I don't want to get into the poor starving artist story. So I try, but that's just me. I just don't like to view myself that way. So I try and keep the focus on you're subscribing and you are supporting me, and these are the costs of that, and it is incredibly helpful. that I kind of try to leave it at that rather than the other story.
I think it's become really important during this time because so many people that made their money from creative industries or arts or theater or comedy or whatever, are no longer able to work. And government's not helping in a lot of countries. So yeah, I think I think a lot of people are really happy to be able to support artists as well that they value at this time. So
yeah,
it's a win-win all around.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Are we on to our final question, Steph's favorite?
We are on the final question. What have you been loving lately? What are the favorite romance books you picked up recently?
Okay, so I've been loving a few things. I have been loving, in terms of romance, I just read, my goodness, her last name is McFarlane, and I'm not sure how to pronounce her first name.
Vari. She's been on
Yes.
our podcast. Vari McFarlane.
Yeah. Actually, maybe that's where I heard about her. Anyway, I just listened to If I Never Met You. Oh my God, I love that book. I love that book so much. I love the tropes in it, and I also love that it's an own voices story, and the way that something I did not address in For the Birds, and definitely not in The Orderly, but am now planning to address is, just I am biracial woman, and I've never addressed this in my writing until the book that I'm writing now, the first Love and Disaster book. And I love the way that Myri handles that in If I Never Met You. So she's influenced me as well as given me great enjoyment. I also recently listened to my first Eloisa James book, Too Wild to Wed.
Love her.
Oh my God, that was so much fun. Oh, it was just great. Yeah, I didn't think that I would really enjoy Regency romance, so I had been kind of avoiding it. But yeah.
I tell everyone, I'm like, I don't know why you're so hesitant. I'm like, they're so much fun.
Yeah, it was totally fun. It was. I will be listening to more or reading. I listen to a lot of audiobooks and then read on the Kindle as well. But so I'll probably be listening to more of Eloisa James books. I'm actually just scrolling through my Audible right now to remind myself of what I've started listening to. A book called How Forests Think by Eduardo Kohn, and that's for research.
I've heard about that. Yeah,
it's interesting. It's very dense, so it's taking me time to get through it. And a book that I have just blown through. I listened to almost all of it yesterday, and I still have another hour and a half left, is The Future Earth by Eric Holthaus. So this is also nonfiction, and he's a meteorologist. And he starts out by talking about, what we already know about climate change, and then takes it, into the next few decades and tells a story of, what he would like to see, the vision that he would, that he hopes for, as if it's happened already. So it's really interesting. And I'm realizing I'm going to have to go back and either read the print version or the Kindle version or listen to this again, because it's not the kind of book where you can listen and do other things. I found myself being oh, I wonder who that, oh, wait a minute. No, this is not this isn't the real part. This is, so it's a little tricky, but, so you just want to pay attention to that. And another book that I'm reading is, by Valerie Kaur, called See No Stranger. That is a beautiful nonfiction. It's a story of an activist who is a Sikh woman and raised on a farm in California, and basically how she went from being this little innocent girl at her, parents and grandparents' knee, learning the loving traditions of their faith, to discovering that they were unique in a mostly Christian community and not really appreciated or welcomed, to 9/11 and hate crimes, and how she ended up becoming an activist, and how that's both transformed her and how it's inspired her and changed how she and others have created change mostly around hate crimes. But it's really a beautiful story. I'm literally recommending it to like everyone I speak with. Read See No Stranger. It's beautiful.
Okay, it's on my to-read list now.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I'd love
Oh,
to know.
I should also point out, since you've been mentioning Own Voices, that we are adding a promo page for Own Boy Voices books on Kobo. So by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be live. But yeah, we'll have a spot on the Kobo Writing Life promo tool for Own Voices stories, which I'm excited about.
I'm excited about that too. Great timing for me personally, but also that's so wonderful. I think after reading If I Never Met You, it just really has it's not the first Own Voices story that I've read by any means, but I don't know, it's just something about the way that she did it. Or maybe it's just where I was in my own stage of evolution that, had me hearing it differently. But
well, maybe when you've written that book, you can come back on and talk to us about the process of it.
Fun. Yeah, that'd definitely be fun.
So you mentioned a podcast, and I just wanted to get the title of the podcast.
Right. So there are two podcasts. So as Rebecca, I have the Climate Smart Farming Show podcast, and that is out now. Yay. 19 episodes, and it will be running until June. And then the one that I'm currently developing and reaching out to prospective interviewees for is one that I will be hosting as Tara, and it's called Love in the Changing Climate. So in this series, it's continuing along the vein of steamy romance in a heating world, where it's just allowing scientists to kind of humanize themselves, through Tara's interviews, through talking about their work, and then also a little bit about their personal life, hopefully.
That's a really good name.
Thank you. Yeah, so Love in the Changing Climate. I am in early stages of production on that, but I do have. I interviewed one person a few months ago, actually, not for the podcast, but I am intending to write to her and ask her if I can use it for the podcast. And then I have another interview scheduled next month, and I'm now at the point of like, okay, it's time to hit it hard and schedule, like 10 or 12 interviews so that I can start producing this. And it serves a dual purpose because it's also research for Tara's books.
Amazing. Love to check that out. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. This has been really good, and we've kept you for ages, so I'm sorry about that.
Oh, you know what? It flew by. Thank you so much for hosting me. It's my pleasure, and I'm really excited to be on the Kobo Writing Life podcast. It's a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're looking for Tara's books, For the Birds, we will have a link to it on our blog. Or if you're interested in learning how to grow your sales, visit KoboWritingLife.com.
This episode was produced by Joni DiPlacido and Stephanie McGrath. Editing is done by Kelly Robotham. Music is provided by Tearjoker. Rachel Wharton assists with production. And big thanks to Tara for being a guest today.
If you're ready to start your self-publishing journey today, sign up for free at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing.